This episode goes out to our patron, Chris. Thank you for a lifetime of love and support. Hi there, Garrett Robinson here. Welcome to the 19th episode of the Nightblade Epic Podcast, Season 3. Hey listener, I hope you're having a great holiday season. These episodes are recorded in advance, so right now I'm probably off relaxing with my family, and I hope you're lucky enough to have some peace and love as well. I love producing and putting out this show every week, and if you want to help make it easier, you should check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/GarrettB.Robinson. My patrons are a big part of why I'm able to do everything I do, write fantasy books, create this podcast, and make my YouTube videos. If you become a supporter, you get all kinds of cool benefits. You can see my writing process as it happens, and even get free copies of my books. Right now, I'm trying to reach 100 supporters on Patreon. When I do, to celebrate, I'm going to commission some new Underrealm character art to share with you and everyone else out there in the community. And then you get to help me decide on our next goal. To support me for just $1 a month, or more than $1 a month, go over to patreon.com/GarrettB.Robinson. That's patreon.com/GarrettB.Robinson. Okay, now it's time for today's episode. Today, you're getting chapters 26 and 27 of Darkfire. When we left off, Lauren had finally snuck into the Shade Captain's audience chamber just as he began his meeting with Damaris of the family Yeren. Enjoy! Darkfire, Chapter 26. Now Lauren had more time to study the man than she had had before. Her first glance had told her much. He was as thickly wrapped with muscle as anyone she had ever seen. His face was covered with a small shag of beard, and his hair hung limp and greasy to his shoulders. But now she could better see the designs etched in tattoos across all his skin, for they were plainly visible under his leather vest lined with black fur. He wore no weapon, but one leaned against the arm of his chair, a great hammer as long as Lauren was tall, and its head was as large as hers. 2 guards filed in behind him, taking positions on either side of his dais. Both were muscle-bound warriors in their own right, but neither came close to the immense bulk of their master. The commander regarded Damaris coolly for a long, silent moment, and the merchant met his gaze unflinching. Lauren wondered what they were waiting for, until finally Damaris collected her fine silk skirts and knelt in a deep curtsy that landed one of her knees on the floor. "Hail, Commander Triskin, honored of the Lord, master of their forces here in Selvin," she said. "I, Damaris of the family Yeren, come before you, as was promised to your master." "My master and yours," said the man. Triskin, she had said his name was. His voice was deep and rumbling, and yet Lauren had thought he would sound somewhat stupider than he did. Though his deep bass reverberated within Lauren's chest, his tone and inflection reminded her of Zane or Jordell, whose tongues flowed easily with the graces one expected at court. "Of course," said Damaris, rising from her curtsy. Her deference was so complete, so absolute. Lauren had never heard her sound thus. Who was this man Triskin, and who was his master, that they could cow such a proud woman so easily? "I greet you, Damaris of the family Yeren," said Triskin, "and bid you welcome to my keep. You have no need of your guards here, and our further counsel will be conducted in their absence." Gregor stiffened behind Damaris, but she turned her head at once and nodded. He hesitated only a moment before turning away and striding towards the great hall's door, motioning the other guards to follow him with a flick of his wrist. Once they had gone, guards in the hall swung the doors shut behind them. Now it was only Damaris, Triskin, and the guards on either side of his dais. And me, of course, thought Lauren. Triskin drummed his fingers on the arm of his throne. His nails were long, longer than Lauren's at any rate, and they made a soft tap-tap upon the wood. Your road here has been fraught with many dramatics, or so the Lord has told me. Nothing more than I could deal with, said Damaris, annoyance slightly tinging her voice. Often the more foolish dogs of the king's law have snapped at my family's heels. Always we have dealt with them swiftly, for after all, we have much practice. And yet, if the king's law were to learn of your journey's ultimate end, what then? The Lord would have greatly preferred it that no one took any more notice of your passing than a mouse creeping by in the night. And thus he bade you, very clearly. A thin sheen of sweat broke out on Damaris's forehead. Lauren felt her own stomach turn a flip, as though she stood in the merchant's place. She had never seen Damaris show so much as a moment's fear or hesitation, much less this long pause that seemed to stretch on for eternity. To her great surprise, Lauren found herself wishing desperately that Damaris would turn and flee the great hall, for the air suddenly seemed fraught with danger. We took every precaution on our journey, and I am well practiced in such plans, said Damaris. But even I cannot predict every end. And ultimately, I was only betrayed by my own desire to help the Lord, for I found someone upon the road who I thought might one day serve him. But she betrayed us, as I could not have foreseen, and stole away that which is most precious to me. With a start, Lauren realized that Damaris was talking about her. Had that been the merchant's plan all along? To recruit her into the service of this lord, whoever he might be? But then why had she tried to turn Lauren over to the constables? Why had she had Lauren pursued and thrown into a cell? But then again, Lauren realized that even at their worst, Damaris's motives were never entirely clear. She had thrown a viper into that cell with Lauren, where it had poisoned her with its bite, and yet later the apothecary had told her the venom was not lethal. And the merchant had spoken highly of her even in opposition, hinting at things Lauren did not understand and lamenting that the two of them had not become friends. At the time, Lauren had taken her words for lies through a forked tongue, the subtle manipulations of a woman who excelled at controlling the fates of everyone she met. Now she was not so sure. I have heard all of this, said Triskin. It does not concern me. All I care about is that you have done what the Lord commands, and for which he has paid your family most handsomely. Damaris lifted her head slightly, seeming to find familiar ground again. I have, Commander, and more than that. I bring you a bounty of maidstones even greater than was promised, and for the excess I have a boon to ask of you. Will you treat with me in the name of the Lord? The great hall fell to silence, marked only by the pounding rain on the roof and a gentle tap-tap as Triskin drummed his long fingernails on the throne. When finally he spoke, it was not in answer to Damaris's question. Instead he asked, How is it that so simple a girl as has been described to me could thwart you so utterly? The Lord was not aware that the family Yeren could be so helpless against one young child of the forest. Lauren's cheeks burned. Though she knew it for foolishness, a part of her mind felt as though he were speaking directly to her, as though he knew she lurked in the rafters and could hear him. You say a young child of the forest, said Damaris, and her tone had grown bitter now. I thought the same. But since then, I have learned much that turns my mind in another direction. No doubt the Lord knows much of the doings surrounding the Battle of Wellmont, but what he may not have heard is that this girl was in the company of mystics all throughout that engagement, and afterwards as well, and was last seen still in their company. I know now what I could not before. She is their agent, a red cloak herself, but in disguise, and has had their help from the beginning." At that, Triskin shot forwards in his chair. "Do you think the Lord has not guessed at this already? And do you think it pleases him that you, Damaris of the family Yeren, might very nearly have brought one of them straight here to our stronghold in the Great Rocks?" Damaris had made a mistake, and she knew it. Once more she fell into a curtsy, and this time she bowed her head. "I would never have brought her here, Commander. I would have sent word to the Lord directly, and had her vetted by one of his agents. The family Yeren will never reveal the Lord, or any of his places of power, this one least of all." Lauren took note of that to tell Jordell later. This was not the only stronghold of the Lord, whoever he was, for Lauren still had no idea. Even more of interest to her was Damaris's mad theory that Lauren had been a mystic all along. If she were not so fearful of being discovered, Lauren might have found it funny. "See that you do not," said Triskin in a voice of steel. "For if that were ever to come to pass, the Lord would end you. He would wipe the family Yeren from the very face of history. No bard would remember any song of you, and no tome would contain the record of your name. All the land you own would be burned and salted, a blight upon the face of the 9 lands that all would know only as a nameless fear." Damaris's head ducked still lower. "I know it, and my family knows it. We wish nothing more than to serve him." "Then serve him by being more cautious with your dealings." Triskin sank back into his throne, going from angry to almost bored in an instant. "Now, you spoke of a boon you wish to beg of the Lord, in return for more mage stones. What would you ask of him?" Damaris waited a long moment, as though ensuring it was safe, before she finally rose from her curtsy. But still she stood cowed, with shoulders drooping and head bowed. "Commander, my boon and the Lord's concern are one and the same. Along our route I had planned to sell much of our cargo, for as the Lord well knows, Yeren is valuable to him only so long as we continue to be profitable and ensure that we can provide him with whatever he desires. But after Cabris, I proceeded straight here as quickly as my caravan could travel. I sold no mage stones to anyone else. As a consequence, I have half again the amount that the Lord purchased, and they are his, if he wants them." Triskin shifted in his seat at that. Lauren well knew that mage stones were beyond value, and in fact were the true source of the family Yeren's immeasurable wealth. Honest goods could only accumulate so much coin. Smuggling mage stones for generations had filled the Yeren coffers beyond accounting. "That is a hefty cargo indeed," said Triskin, "and must accompany a hefty request." "A request not so great for the Lord to carry out as it has been for me, I think. That is why I ask. I think that for your master, and mine, the task will be but a trifle. I ask that he finds my daughter Annis and returns her to me." A small smile appeared at the corner of Triskin's mouth. Lauren wondered if he had been expecting the question, for it did not seem to surprise him. "I see. You have failed to track her down yourself, have you?" "Many agents within our family have tried, and we have pressed many of our contacts within the mystics to aid us. Yet therein lies the problem. If, as we both suspect, the girl Lauren is allied with the Red Cloaks, then they will make every attempt to thwart our efforts to find her. And if we cannot find Lauren, then we cannot find Annis, for I believe they still travel in company." Triskin rapped his nails. Tap, tap. "Prudent thinking, but so much mage stone seems a price too great, and I find myself suspicious." "The Lord has considerable resources at his disposal," said Damaris. "Yet to mobilize them for such a task may cause him some minor annoyance. The mage stones are a token, A gift to thank him for his kindness in this smallest of matters." "Smallest of matters indeed. I will beseech the Lord upon your behalf. You will leave your token with me regardless." Damaris did not answer that at first, and Lauren caught a sharp jerk of her head. Triskin's eyes narrowed. Lauren realized it was a test. He meant to make Damaris prove her loyalty by accepting her payment, but on different terms than those she had strictly offered. Finally, Damaris nodded. "Of course. As I said, they are a gift." "Good. Then—" Triskin's words were cut off as the front door of the great hall slammed open. The commander's guards leaped to the fore and drew their blades, and Damaris whirled, but it was only a stronghold guard, running in with her gray cloak fluttering behind her. She flew past Damaris to the foot of the dais and knelt. "Commander," said the messenger, "we have found a small party of spies in the cave south of the stronghold." Triskin shot to his feet. "How many? Have we taken them?" "Not yet, but a force has been dispatched to bring them into the cells, or kill them." Darkfire, Chapter 27. "Jim, Annis, Albern, no." Triskin's guards sheathed their blades, but the commander went to the hammer that leaned against his throne. He seized its handle and, though it looked heavier than a boulder, lifted it easily to slide it into a sheath on his back. "Take me to the caves. Lady Damaris, your request has been heard. Wait for me within your quarters while I deal with this nuisance." "Of course," said Damaris, curtsying a final time. Triskin swept past her and out of the room. As if he had held her in a spell, once Triskin was gone, Lauren found herself able to move again. She stood from her crouch in the rafters, wincing as her knees screamed with pain from holding position so long in the chilled air. Swiftly, she slunk back to the rafter beside the window and stepped out to the sill. As she clasped her black cloak around her once more, her gaze drifted upward. There was the lip of the roof, a pace above her outstretched hand. It seemed impossibly out of reach, but she had to try. Jem and Annis were in mortal danger, and Jordell did not even know it. She let herself wait one long moment, then crouched and jumped as high as she could. The angle was wrong, and she nearly missed the grip. Her right hand slipped away, her left hand clinging desperately to the roof's edge. A spike of pain shot through her torn finger, and she gritted her teeth to keep from crying out. She swung out and away from the wall, thinking for a moment she would lose what little hold she had, before finally swinging back in and seizing the lip with her other hand. Every muscle in her arms and chest burned with the pain of her earlier fall and the biting air, but still she heaved with all her might. Her right elbow came up over the edge, and after a little more pulling and wriggling, she collapsed upon the rooftop in a heap. But she could not take even a moment to rest. Leaping to her feet, she darted for the rope and seized it, wincing at the pain in her mangled hands. She tried to pull herself up, but that was far too slow. The rope jerked, and suddenly she found herself flying upwards through the air. Looking up, she saw Jordell's strong gloved hands leaping over each other as he pulled her up one arm's length at a time. Lauren wanted to keep climbing, to help him lift her, but the pain left her unable to do anything more than hold on as he tugged her to the top. The mystic seized her arm as soon as she was within reach and nearly flung her onto the rooftop. She lay on her back, gasping and clutching her hands between her knees, trying to stop the fire in her palms. "Come, Lauren, you must rise." Jordell seized her arm and pulled her up. "I heard shouting in the courtyard. If you have been discovered, we must flee. Quickly." "Not me," said Lauren miserably. "It was not me they found. The others." Jordell's keen blue eyes went wide as he froze. He looked at the hatch leading down, and then to the edge of the roof. "We cannot go all the way back through the stronghold," he said. "It will take far too long. We will lower the rope over the outer wall and climb down that way." Lauren felt fear spread across her expression, and Jordell's eyes grew troubled. He seized her wrists and flipped her palms upward. His brows drew close at the blood and the sight of her finger where the nail had been torn free. "We have to help them," he said softly. "Here, take my gloves. That will help at least." He ripped them from his hands and gave them to her. Lauren pulled them on gratefully. They were wet straight through from the rain, and she felt her blood begin to soak into the leather, mingling with the rainwater. Meanwhile, Jordell untied the rope from the north end of the roof and retied it to one of the ramparts on the south side. He looked over the edge and turned back with a frown. "It ends 4 paces from the ground," he said. "We shall have to take care with the final drop. Are you ready?" "I must be," said Lauren. Though her body did not wish to obey her, still she forced herself forwards. "A moment," said Jordell, holding up a hand to stop her. In a few seconds he pulled the rope back up to the roof, then handed her the end of it. Lauren took it in her gloved hands and looked up at him in question. "I will lower you down," said Jordell. "It will be easier on you and make you less likely to fall, I think." Lauren felt her heart flutter. "But what if your grip should slip? What if guards arrive while you are lowering me?" "It is not my grip I worry about, and if we are quick, no one will have a chance to come. Quickly, we have no time for argument." He lifted Lauren up as if she were a child and perched her on the edge of the rampart, then took the rope in his thick hands. At his nod, Lauren pushed herself from the edge. She felt the rope give slightly in Jordell's grip, and in a panic she thought he was losing her already. But it was only his arm stretching to full length, and she jolted to a stop just a pace down. She planted her boots on the wall the way she had before, an attempt to control her descent and lessen Jordell's burden however she could. Lauren need not have worried. Jordell's hands moved swiftly, end over end as he lowered her quickly down the stronghold's outer wall. She felt for one mad moment that she was walking backwards down the stones, as if they were a floor and she were playing some children's game. Just as Jordell had said, the rope ended 4 paces from the ground. Lauren stopped with a jolt and looked up to see Jordell's face peering over the rampart. Now she must drop the rest of the way. She let her feet fall free of the castle, dangling at a height nearly double her own. "I must let go," she thought. "Annis and Jem need me." Her frozen fingers finally obeyed her, and she plummeted through the air. Lauren had spent long years dropping from trees in the birchwood and knew how to absorb the shock of a landing in her legs. But the ground of the birchwood had been soft loam, and now she landed on rock. Her ankle twisted beneath her and she fell backwards, landing hard and slamming her head on the stone. After the blow Zane had given her in the cave days ago, this felt like a spike had lodged itself in her brain. For a moment she lay senseless, mouth open in a wordless scream, unable to move. When she lifted her head, it hurt, but not quite so badly as she had feared. And when she tried to move her ankle, it responded with only a small twinge of pain. "Not so bad as it could have been," she muttered to herself, climbing to her feet, and then leaping quickly out of the way, for Jordell had scurried down the rope like a squirrel down a tree. Already he had reached the bottom. He hit the ground a pace from her and tumbled into a somersault before landing on his back, then leaped to his feet. "Are you hurt?" he said. "Not badly," said Lauren. "Let us go." Jordell led the way along the stronghold wall, back to the cave where the others lay hidden. Not hidden any longer, thought Lauren. The stronghold guards came into view first. Several lurked outside the cave mouth, hidden around the edge of the stronghold. Lauren soon saw why. 3 bodies lay just outside the mouth of the cave, arrows sticking from their chests like flagpoles. Lauren ducked for the stronghold wall on instinct so that the soldiers would not see them, but Jordell pushed onwards, and then she remembered that they still wore guard uniforms. So she followed closely behind him, throwing back her cowl and casting her cloak back over her shoulders, so that hopefully the other guards would not notice it was black, not gray. But she made sure the edge of the cloak still concealed her dagger, which hung near the back of her belt. One of the guards spotted them. "Take cover, friends, or you'll end up like our comrades there." He gave a significant nod to the bodies sprawled outside the cave. Jordell and Lauren darted around the corner, but Lauren stood in full view of the cave, holding her head high, hoping Albern would look out and recognize her. Jordell, meanwhile, ducked in company with the man who had spoken to them. 3 other guards stood behind, each afraid to press forwards. "How many are in there?" said Jordell. "I cannot count for certain, but I have seen at least 2, said the guard. "But one of them was a child." "A child?" said Lauren, feigning surprise. Had they seen Annis? Everything might be lost if Damaris learned that Annis was here. "Aye, a thin boy, dressed all in rags. Looks like he belongs begging on some city street, not up in these mountains," said the man. Lauren breathed a quiet sigh of relief. Jordell turned and gave her an urgent look. He tossed his head in the direction of the other guards. She sized them up. There were 4 of them against Jordell and Lauren, and who knew when more would arrive. Triskin might come at any moment, and Lauren did not enjoy the thought of testing herself against that warhammer. The guard at the back was smallest, a thin woman with short red hair who did not look much older than Lauren herself, though her eyes were filled with a grim determination. To Lauren's other side, she was shocked to recognize the thin, reedy man who had spoken so rudely to Jordell and her in the mess hall. He did not seem to recognize either of them, for his eyes were fixed on the cave. With surprise on her side, she thought she could take the 2 of them. She nodded to Jordell and drew her dagger. In a burst of motion, Jordell drove his elbow into the face of the thick man beside him. Lauren crashed her pommel on the back of the thin man's head, and he slumped to the ground. The woman's eyes flashed with surprise, but she quickly brought her sword around in a swing at Lauren's head. Lauren barely ducked it, and then kicked the woman's shin to fell her. But the shade kept her grip on her sword and swung it again. Lauren had to dart back to avoid the strike, but then she seized the woman's tunic, striking her 3 times in the face with her fist while still holding the dagger's hilt. It lent extra weight to her blows, and the woman fell, senseless. Lauren looked up to find Jordell with his arms wrapped around the neck of the final soldier, choking the breath out of him. The man struggled to strike back, but he could not loosen the mystic's grip. His eyes fluttered up and rolled back in his head, and he fell unconscious. Jordell dropped him unceremoniously to the ground. "Now let us find our friends and hope they do not shoot us," he said. They ran for the cave mouth, their weapons sheathed and their hands held high. Lauren stepped distastefully around the bodies on the ground, averting her eyes from them. There was so much death, no matter how she tried to avoid it. Albern must have recognized them, for no arrows came flying out of the darkness. No sooner had they entered the cave than Jem and Annis seized Lauren in a hug. Zane lay behind them all, near the horses, his eyes filled with concern. "Well, you certainly took your time getting here," said Albern, stepping forwards. He still held an arrow nocked, but he had relaxed his draw. Despite the jovial tone of his words, Lauren saw the relief in his eyes. "When we heard the shouts of alarm inside the fort, we thought you had been found," said Annis. "It was not long before we realized they had spotted us, not you." "We held them off admirably, though, I think," said Jem, stepping back from his hug as though embarrassed. "Certainly they were no match for our determination and prowess." "Yes, the little master here cowered so fearfully that the enemy took pity on him and fled," said Albern. Jem opened his mouth to answer, but Jordell interrupted him. "We have no time for words, only flight. Fetch the horses and Zane, for—" The heavy crash of a gate striking the ground drowned out his words. All of them stopped in their tracks and turned to the mouth of the cave. Just as from around the corner of the stronghold, Triskin stepped forwards, his great warhammer clutched in both hands. This has been a production of Legacy Books, written and narrated by Garrett Robinson. The music in this podcast was created by Will Musser. Check out his incredible work at willmusser.com. That's WILLMUSSER.com. Today's letter is E. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.